The fight against climate change cannot be won unless all stakeholders, all relevant and interested individuals and groups and communities are part of the fight on the front lines, hand in hand with the rest of the international community. Indigenous peoples and local communities are an important part of this fight against climate change. Indigenous peoples, by most accountings, although they make up about a quarter of the world's population, nevertheless manage about 80% of the world's remaining biological diversity, on land as well as in the ocean. Local communities play a similarly important role, being fisher folk, forest managers, livestock herders, and so forth, who are also intimately connected with the natural environment. In the Pacific Islands, where I am from, although our government actions and policies and documents do not often reference explicitly indigenous peoples and local communities, there is an understanding that most peoples and communities in the Pacific are indigenous peoples and local communities, given our long-standing connections to the land and marine spaces that we occupy today. In recognition of the important contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities to the fight against climate change, the Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC has adopted and implemented a local communities and indigenous peoples platform, as well as a facilitative working group for the platform that, among other things, allows for equal representation on the facilitative working group for party representatives as well as representatives of indigenous peoples, with 7 party representatives on equal footing with 7 representatives for indigenous peoples on the facilitative working group, including a set-aside seat for SIDS, as well as a set-aside seat for a representative of indigenous peoples from the Pacific region. This equal playing field and participation is a critical and long overdue recognition of the partnership potential that indigenous peoples and local communities can play alongside parties and governments in the fight against climate change. Drawing on millennia of traditional knowledge, of indigenous knowledge, of local knowledge about the natural environment, about how the natural environment has changed over millennia, and about how to adapt to such changes, as well as how to take steps to remedy and reverse such changes. All of these potential contributions are available in indigenous peoples and local communities, including in the Pacific. It is key that parties to the UNFCCC continue to recognize the important contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities going forward as we embark on a monumental challenge over the next decade or two to bend the curve of climate change and make sure that we live a world for future generations that is inhabitable, allows for prosperity, and continues the intimate connections to the natural environment that indigenous peoples and local communities have enjoyed through millennia.